Hello everyone, welcome to KuirthiyTV. In this episode, I'm talking with Dr. Niall Tudlam, Dr. Jacob Tim, and Mr. Niall Tate-Mamer. Our conversation today centers on climate, environmental issues, and their health implications. Dr. Niall Tudlam is an assistant professor at the University of Washington, Missouri. He is a mental health and trauma expert. Dr. Niall is currently leading an NIH-funded study in refugee settlements in Uganda to understand factors around adherence to HIV treatment, trauma-associated disorders, psychological functioning, and sexual decision-making, which will contribute to understanding of the dual public health threats of mental health and HIV in this vulnerable population. Niall Tate-Mamer is an environment and natural resources governance specialist and policy analyst with Juba-based Sud Institute. He is currently working with the United Nations Mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, as an Environment Affairs Officer. Views expressed here are his own. Dr. Jacob Tim is a public health specialist. He runs a non-profit organization, Southern Sudan Health Organization. He provides health education and health care through a clinic. So join us as we discuss these vital issues of life and death.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting us to talk about these issues, the issues of environmental pollution, climate change related matters, and public health implications. Environment is life, everything depends on it. So when environment becomes, sick, humans also become sick. And when environment becomes hungry, humans also become hungry. So basically, we depend on the environment. If the environment is healthy, we are all healthy, basically. It's the essence here. And so now in South Sudan, the issues we are facing, triple crisis of flooding, drought, and environmental pollution. Especially pollution that is related to the oil and gas industry, and flooding and drought that is induced by global warming and climate change. And so this has displaced millions of people, as we have witnessed since 2019. Millions of people have been displaced, been affected, livelihoods have been, destroyed, and migration because of displacement has led to conflicts, across the country. So people have been brought to areas where they have never been before, where their means of livelihoods are not available. So like farmers being displaced from areas of their farming and coming to areas where they are not having access to land for farming, or pastoralists moving away from their areas of access to pasture to areas basically where they are in conflict with people with other means of livelihoods like farmers. So these are some of the issues that are currently facing South Sudan. And so currently South Sudan has been represented by the Minister of Environment in the United Nations Environment General Assembly. And South Sudan is basically to make a case at the global stage on these issues that are affecting South Sudan. And these issues, as we know, are not of South Sudan making, basically. So issues of global warming, as we know, global warming is caused by greenhouse gases that are emitted by industrialized nations, and the victims are developing countries like South Sudan. And this issue has been in discussion since the 1990s, which culminated in the signing of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is a framework that commits all countries to bring the emissions of greenhouse gases to a level that will not be too dangerous for the planet, which was later followed by Kyoto Protocol, as we know, committing nations that are developed to bring the emissions to the pre-industrial level. So these are the things that are being done to basically bring down the greenhouse gases and to mitigate and to adapt to climate change. So South Sudan being at the United Nations Environment General Assembly is basically to make a voice heard and to also be part of the global solution. And so these are the matters that are affecting our people on everyday basis. So for example, now a place is affected by flooding and at the same time by drought. For example, in Jonglei State, you have the paradox of too much water and the paradox of too little water. With the flooding in some of the counties in the west and drought affecting some of the counties in the east. For example, Akobo and Uro, both of them are affected at the same time by flooding and by drought at the same time. And the same happens across the country. You go to Unity State, it's the same thing. Unity State basically has been submerged underwater since 2019. And the last time I went to Bentiu, Bentiu is basically like an island, a sea surrounded by a sea of flood water, basically. So basically, this is the situation. So water is coming from all directions and has submerged the area. And the surrounding area is where the oil industry is operating. The oil drilling activities are happening in the surrounding area within the radius of 50 kilometers from this flooding. So the flooding has basically worsened the oil pollution in those areas, not only in Unity State and Ruweng and Afana, but it's also the same thing in Afana State. So these issues are, affecting our people. So it's a combination, as I said earlier. It's a triple crisis of flooding, drought, and pollution, all combined together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Niall, for laying that one out. This is really brilliant. It will help us make sense of this. Now, I want to give a chance to Dr. Niall Tudlam to comment on some key health issues you think are related to what Niall has laid out.
First of all, let me say it's such a great pleasure and honor to be with you, Dr. Queer, and thanks for bringing us together to discuss this important topic. To comment on the issues that were raised by our colleague Niall, basically, as he indicated, so a healthy environment is necessary for a healthy life and well-being of the society, of the population. So once you begin when the environment is contaminated or if affected in any way, there is no way that individuals can live healthy lives. We often say in public health that, some of the earliest works of public health actually revolved around sanitation work for people to live in a clean environment. So in terms of the things that who have been laid out. So let's take, for example, the oil pollution that he just talked about. Some of the health implications that have been identified in our context are, things like birth defects. So in Unity State, for example, in the last 5 to 6 years, people have noticed that there are so many babies being born with a lot of birth defects. I think the last report I saw was that about 15 children, I think since 1929, have been born either without limbs, without eyes. And so these are birth defects that are directly attributable to pollution from the oil sector. And I think all of those babies have died. So that's one sort of way to think about it. Another implication when you talked about floods and droughts are basically floods when people are displaced. There are a lot of things that happen as a result of that displacement. So people, basically, it's almost similar to when you're displaced by war. We now know we have a term called, climate refugees, where people have been displaced as a result of climate change. And that comes with all of the problems that comes with displacement, right? Mental health issues that arise from that. Another issue that you could think about also when the environment is affected, flooding in particular, comes with a number of diseases, infectious diseases like cholera, for example. Like I think some of the most recent outbreaks in the world happened in South Sudan. I think the last report I saw, just this year alone, there's about 78,000 cases of cholera, many of which may be related to some of these flooded areas with over 1,000 deaths. And so those are key things that we can look at as coming directly from the impact of that comes from the environment. And I'll let my colleague Jacob add anything if there's some things I've missed from that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Niall, for laying those ones out. Dr. Jacob, you've been on the ground and you're involved also with the humanitarian effort. So you can weigh in on some of the health implications you've seen. And you can also tie that in with the NGOs you work with and your own work.
Yeah, thank you, colleague. Let me start by what Niall said about flooding. And for example, in 2019, last time I saw you, Dr. Niall Tidmame, I visited Jonglei State And as I was talking, this is pre-flooding. There were some chiefs who detected that the dike might broke, and in fact, they took a trip to Juba, and it's kind of like an early warning. And they said, "Hey, what we are seeing, the water level is rising, and we need some equipment to be able to support the dike." I was on the ground, so this was early in 2019. Well, unfortunately, nobody heard them. I think literally a month later, I came back to the US and the flooding came and everything was displaced. So you can see that the climate change changed a lot. And just to tie that, what we are talking here really, it's something some of my colleagues, you may be familiar, is what we call One Health approach, really. I know we don't have veterinarian here, but they're all interrelated. The One Health approach concept basically integrated this framework that recognize the human health, which is the implication of human health. We know about it. The animal health. I was talking to some of the cattle herdmen around Mangala, for example. They were being evacuated coming from Equatoria, Central Equatoria. And in one setting, all of a sudden, all of the cattle died. And that goes into, in order to understand human health, you ought to understand animal health, and then the environment health. These three things are interdependent because we have a little bit in South Sudan, a little bit of understanding of human health. Animal health is very limited. It's left to the cattleman. And environmental health, as we said, it's beyond just the oil field. It's now flooding, which bring different health implication, right? You talk about the environmental implication. Well, in our case, in what I'm seeing in humanitarian health is these key health implication include increased incident of waterborne diseases such as cholera. You guys have heard. I dealt with a lot of cholera response in Jonglei State, even as far as Ring, where the refugees from North Sudan are coming, and so it's overcrowded. So we're not talking about the South Sudanese host IDPs anymore. We are talking about the influx of the Sudanese from North Sudan. So cholera was a perfect spot, overcrowded, a lack of water, and then we have diarrheal diseases, typhoid, higher malaria transmission due to expanding of mosquito breeding sites. After flooding, we see this a lot. Rising malnutrition rates due to crop failure and food shortages in the last 5-6 years. I don't think, in particular, northern South Sudan, in the northern state, they haven't been really cultivating due to the food shortages. And as you can see, it's a national security. Respiratory illness is linked to air pollution and gas flaring. We have seen that. The biggest thing here is also mental health challenges resulting from repeated displacement, loss of livelihoods, all the cattle were lost, and prolonged crisis. I remember people coming to Mangala IDP when my organization first responded. We have a terrible incident of mental health. A young man ended up taking his life because all of his cow died. There was no response and left 2 children. This is what brings mental health because they lost everything. Those are the key things. And more importantly, in these cases, we see women, children, the elderly and displaced population are disproportionately affected. It's always the vulnerable people. So this topic is very important, but I think it's a need the One Health approach in South Sudan, in which the developed nations are going now. It's not just understanding human health, environmental health, is animal health. These are really 3 key things we need to address as South Sudanese in order to have a prosperous nation.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Jacob, for all this, because this is what we need to be able to go deeper into what some of us who are outside the field do not know. So thank you. I want to go back to Niall Tate Mahmed. What are some of the things being done, whether locally by individuals in the communities, and also at the state level, at the federal level? What are some of the issues you see happening to mitigate the problem you laid out?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, there are a lot of efforts that are being made locally by either the government or the NGOs, both international or national. Let me begin with the oil pollution. I have actually been involved in studies related to pollution in the oil sector. So when I came back in 2013 from Canada, so my first project was actually on environmental protection and transparency and accountability in the oil and gas industry. And through that effort, plus others, some other civil society organizations, we actually highlighted a lot of issues related to the environment. Like one of the studies we did, we were able to show the birth defects. For example, in Malut, we discovered 13 cases of birth defects in the population, basically through interviews we conducted there. In Pariang, we've been able to highlight some of the health-related issues like birth defects more than even in Malut. So these are efforts that are being done basically, because I'm starting with the research because this is how people come to know it, how people come to know the problem. So a German organization called the Sanya Group has been able to actually conduct a study examining the drinking water in areas in Koch, which is near the oil field in Tarjat, and they were able to discover that the water for drinking has actually been contaminated. So these are some of the things that are being done basically. And these efforts have led to a call for comprehensive environmental audit. And environmental audit actually has been undertaken by the government of South Sudan through the Ministry of Petroleum in collaboration with the Ministry of Environment. They started a bidding process, comparative bidding process for the environmental audit. That was in 2020, actually. And they established a committee that involved all the stakeholders. The Ministry of Environment was involved, Ministry of Health was involved, the Ministry of Petroleum, the research institutions, and the civil society. I was actually a member on that committee, environmental audit committee, to oversee the process for the audit. And the environmental audit actually has been completed. What remains now is submission for approval that has remained. So it's just one of those things that are being done as the starting point to fix the issues. So some of these studies, especially this audit has been able to highlight some of the problems, and it has been able to come up with some recommendations on what should be done, of course. And what I think should be done, which is not yet being done, is to really do further than what has been done, which is to conduct a comprehensive environmental assessment, not just the audit. Like the audit is limited to the compliance and not whether you are complying or not. But a comprehensive environmental assessment will look into the damage that has been done in terms of the pollution damage on water, soil contamination, biodiversity loss, the oil spill, and coming up with how to remediate all those things. So this is what I think should be done. And there is a similar example that we can adopt as South Sudanese. You are familiar with the issues in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, where the Nigerian government, after many years of pollution, invited the United Nations Environment Program to conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment. That comprehensive environmental assessment achieved something, and that something is they have been able to scientifically establish the problem, determine the pollution damage that has occurred, and they have been able to come up with mechanism for remediation. The Nigerian government has now been on course to do the remediation, basically. I was there in November 2018. We traveled to Abuja and then to the Niger Delta, and we witnessed the extent of damage that has occurred there and what they are doing so far to actually fix the issue. I think we are in the same situation in South Sudan based on what I have seen for the last 10 years. We are almost in the same way. So the level of pollution in the Niger Delta is basically the same as the level of pollution in South Sudan. And so we need to really conduct a comprehensive, credible, basically. That's why, I recommend the UN environment to be the one to do this, because it will come with the credibility, because this is a scientific body, UN scientific body that will do this work. The recommendations should be basically implemented by an act of parliament or through an executive order from the president, which will have the force of law basically to implement that. This is the only way. I know companies are already starting. They have already known that some damage has been done and the liability will be on them for sure. Even if they run away, the liability will still be on them. You know, like Queer, you are familiar with the Talisman, which was based in Calgary. I'm sure you know that Talisman, of course, is no longer there. You know, when it was accused of human rights violations in the oil fields in South Sudan, of course, it became a reputational damage for them. So it was taken to court in New York. And even though the case was dismissed, the reputation they had was already lost. And so the company was basically dismantled. And the same thing with Lundin, which is a company, a sewage company that I'm sure you are aware of. It was also in the same oil fields in Unity and Ruweng. So it also left because of the pressure. These are Western companies, by the way. And the Eastern companies remain behind because they don't have domestic pressure at home, like Chinese companies are not being given any pressure back home in China. Same thing with the Malaysians, even though actually Petronas actually left finally. But the reason Petronas left is the liability. They are basically escaping liability. But this is something that the government of South Sudan should note. They should not escape liability and they should be taken to court. You know, such an assessment, you know, can prove, and of course there is no doubt that the environment has been damaged and the damage is due to oil pollution and based on the Petroleum Act 2012. So the pollution, the liability for pollution is on the contractors, basically. And so the government of South Sudan should not worry about whether the oil companies should be held accountable or not. They have basically violated the laws of South Sudan, and it is the duty of the government of South Sudan to hold them accountable.
Hello, everyone. Before I go back to Niall, I want to urge you to subscribe, share this video to support the channel. We are closing in on 1,000 subscribers. That is great work, everyone. So I hope by the end of this year, we'll be able to hit 4,000 subscribers. So please subscribe to support this work so that I can bring you incredible guests. Thank you.
So this is so I have just started with what is being done in the oil and gas industry and what I think has not yet been done and should be done. With regards to the climate change issues, as I mentioned before, climate change issues are global in nature. The cause of global climate change is from the global West. Industrialized countries, basically, the emission of greenhouse gases is from the industrialized countries like the USA, UK, and France, and other big countries, big economies.
Okay.
But the victims are developing countries like us. We have seen this through the flooding that is occurring every year. We have seen it through the heat waves. I remember 2023 was actually the worst heat wave ever, actually. The schools were closed because of the heat wave. Last year was the same, and we expect the same thing to happen. So these kinds of, extreme climate events are becoming the normal, basically.
Okay.
And so what do? There is already a global effort. As I mentioned earlier, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is the framework that requires all countries to cooperate to mitigate the emissions of greenhouse gases. And the Paris Agreement is committing all the countries that are developing or developed to plan to bring their emissions so that the global emissions are brought down to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this is an ambitious goal, and South Sudan is also part of that global effort. So this is what is being done, basically, by the government of South Sudan. The government has been able to issue 2 nationally determined contributions. The last was issued in 2021, and these nationally determined contributions are the plans laying out how the government of South Sudan is going to reduce the emissions and is going to actually mitigate or adapt to climate change. It involves like infrastructure that is resilient to climate change, including reducing the flooding issues, like the infrastructure being built to resist all these issues of flooding and drought. So
Okay.
climate smart agriculture for the areas that are water is scarce, and building dikes. For example, dikes is actually proving to be really good. Dr. Jacob mentioned earlier about the dike in Jonglei, which starts in Bor County to twitch east to the border with Duke. This dike was initially built by the US aid back in 2005, 2006 as part of the peace dividend, but then it got eroded over the years without maintenance. And recently efforts are being made to actually rebuild this dike. So this is one of those efforts that are being made And in fact, last year there was a huge flood that was similar to 2020's flood. But because of the maintenance of the dike, it helped a lot in many areas. So many areas actually were spared by the flood of last year, even this year also. The airport in a place called Mabirgul, the bridge there of Mabirgul Point was basically closed earlier on in the season. And so the outflow of flooding into north of Bor County and the whole of Twitches County was actually prevented this year compared to the previous years. So these are some of the efforts that are being made. Two, which I mentioned earlier as one of the worst affected, if not the worst affected, is basically Rukona and Binti, which are twin cities, are basically being protected by a dike that was built by the United Nations mission in South Sudan, and that's why they are basically like in an island because they are surrounded by a dike. Okay. So these are the efforts that are being made. If these efforts are not there, the situation would have been worse than it is. And you have seen recently when the Minister of Environment announced 50 million US dollars in funding from the Green Climate Fund with regards to flooding. My opinion is actually to conduct comprehensive studies to come up with a durable solution. Much of the water that floods our areas, especially downstream, beginning in Jonglei and Unity State and Upper Nile and Werrap and the lakes, all of these waters come down from highlands at the border with Congo and from Uganda. And it will be good actually to study the possibility of building dams upstream. Okay. At the border with Uganda to regulate the flow of extreme water as a way of actually minimizing the extreme flooding. Thank you.
Thank you, Niall, for those comments. So I want to give Niall and Dr. Jacob a chance to weigh in on what is to be done in the context of health.
Yes.
Dr. Jacob, you raised some solution models earlier. So I want you to expand on those things. What would they look like and what is required actually to implement them?
So thank you so much. When I think of this term of what the solution is, I said short-term, medium-term, and long-term goal, right? In our area, we're talking about what we call basic health services, which include maternal and child health, immunization, treatment of communicable diseases. These things cannot wait. Malaria, TB, HIV, nutrition services, and emergency care. We're talking about preventative. We say prevention is better than cure, right? It comes down to this. Financing. Follow the money. What my colleague said, Niall, already is global issues. And by the way, maybe it's a little bit of my pet peeve. In South Sudan, whatever ministry we have the best policy, we have the best written, we have best everything. Where the problem is implementation. Let's talk about finance. Public health financing is extremely low. If I'm not mistaken, just to start with Ministry of Health budget, it's supposed to be 15%. Last time I checked, is lower than 2%. Okay? The government health budget cover only a small, this is a key, a small fraction of the system needed, the government. As a result, over 70 to 80% of the health services are funded and delivered by, as my colleague said, international and national NGOs, in which I fall under this, UN agencies, faith-based organizations. So here's where the problem is. Think about this. If your country is being funded 70 to 80% by the international NGO, the question becomes, where is government of South Sudan's skin in the game? You need to pump money into infrastructure, into all this. So it comes down to funding. And if the budget is extremely low, how are you going to provide services? And here's the reality. Unfortunately, in the last 1 year, U.S. aid, for example, has been cut. U.S. aid used to provide a lot of HIV medication. So those services are out of the window. So the biggest issue is financing. Where do we get the money? Every time I talk, and I hope my colleague Niall Tidmame will not get this, it's not personal, but I hear UN will do this, international will do this, and everything will do this. What is our call? What can we do? How much are we putting in? How much of the budget I could tell you without my small NGOs, our budget is around 300,000. And we do a lot because it goes a long way. Just in a small IDPs that I'm in charge of 60,000. Last year, actually this year, we deliver over 300 babies. But the issue is there's no funding to have medication, healthcare workers, workforce. It's speaking in a small sense of budget for the health. Imagine environment, the research. Until we address that, I mean, if our thought as South Sudanese is that what is the solution? I'm going to go to my friend who is a colleague in big international NGO to solve my issues. Then what happened when people are leaving? Like USAID was, for example, who was a big funder for other health organizations, to use an example. They left overnight. People are now left vulnerable. So I think the solution really, and it go across, is financing. Do we have enough budget? Not just only health. Do we have enough? Why don't we flip the chart that 80% of our this is basic health services. I haven't talked about chronic diseases or a heart attack, or I don't even think we have an open heart surgery. I don't think we can do it in Juba, South Sudan. So think about it. There was cases when there was Zol Kabir had a heart attack, and heart attack doesn't need a rocket scientist. You have to charter a plane to wherever it's going. The person is dead. So how many heart attack would we have? We don't even address those. We haven't even got to that. We are in communicable diseases. This is our challenge. Now, when my good friend Niall is doing comprehensive research, we hope we can do research before all this so that we can have this. But guess what happened? There's no money. There's no money for basic services. There's no money for research, and not to speak on Niall behavior. So it comes down to funding. So government of South Sudan has to pump in enough, because we have enough resources. We have oil. I believe we have oil budget, for example. So anyway, I think I'm gonna stop there. But the solution is we gotta have enough funding to do all this thing that is coming from our own government. That is not just depending on the UN. Now, collaboration with the UN and international NGOs, all that is well and good. But if you want to sustain the health services of the country, you ought to pump in enough money to have a skin in the game. So everything is money. Thank you.
I want, before Dr. Niall comments, I want to ask you a question that you can address briefly. You said the main problem is funding. Without funding, most of these issues, like the things Niall laid out, need money. What are some of the things South Sudanese can do with minimal funding? You said your budget is 300,000, but you are still able to do a lot. What are some of the things you see happening that South Sudanese can do to mitigate the health issues caused by the environment without much funding? What are some of the things you see happening? Because you see some people are very resourceful. And then I'll give it to Niall. What do you think?
I think there's a lot we could do with the limited funding, just like what we've been doing. I was just using a case of my organization, right? I've been there for 17 years. I remember a case when the IDP people were coming to Mangala, and the big NGO approached me, for example, and say, hey, what's happening? And I give them all the data. And of course, they apply for the grant. This NGO came back, got the big funding, and basically kicked me out. Somehow I was the one who gave the data, the initial assessment, and they kicked me out because they got what they want. They even act like they don't know. 6 months later, they packaged their stuff. There was a report that, hey, we done our funding, for example, the blah, 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 and they left. And then they got another extension for 1 year. And then 1 year was over and they left. As I speak with you with this IDP camp that we're in, it's over 60,000 IDPs. It is us who are left to do the best we can. You know why we're there? We are the South Sudanese people. They're our people. And where are we running? There's nowhere. But if I'm coming with a funding to just do, so it seems like these funding shortages and then go. The question becomes, health is a continuum of care. Mm-hmm. It's not a one-time thing you just stop. So just to give that example, it is us who are still just in one department. This year, every year we get over 400 babies delivered in maternal and child health. We respond to cholera outbreak in church areas. We go to Ring with a limited funding. Okay, so imagine if the government can just increase something from 2 to 15% and actually prioritize the national NGOs, the natives. Natives help natives. It is the natives that are now going to run because it's their people. Where are you going to run to? And to empower, and I know the thing that I'm saying is it's in the book that capacity building for this and this, but it's not the reality on the ground. When you see how we are funding our healthcare system, speaking of finance, it's through the global grant, which is between the government and the health pool fund, which is scary. Every 5 years it will run out. If that money is given to competent South Sudanese national NGOs, they will be able to use it carefully, but that's not the reality. The big NGOs get the funding to run the health care services, and when health break to lose, guess what? They leave. They're out of there, and it is us. The small NGOs are left to do the work, which we don't have enough funding again. So I think you can do so much to invest in your own people, the capability, because South Sudanese are very capable in all of the areas. They can do everything. It's just they don't have the funding. They need to be really backed up by the politician and the different departments to give them the work to do. You can do so much with limited amount, as I just used my case study. Thank you. I hope I answer your question.
Okay, thank you. Now, Dr. Niall, what do you see are the solution based on what Jacob has said and Niall has laid out? Because Niall said many important solutions being provided. So go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. And so I think for us, especially in the context of South Sudan, we cannot talk about solutions without talking about the elephant in the room, which is the conflict that is going on in the country, right? We know public health and conflict go hand in hand. So when there's conflict, public health is the one of those things that suffers. And part of what we are talking about here in terms of funding, most governments usually what they do when in the event of conflict is resources are redirecting to prosecuting the war in that case. And so health budget and all of these then decline. And therefore you are not able to do the basic things that you're doing. So I think a solution which is not an immediate term, but it's an ongoing process that we can do over the medium and the long term is the resolution of conflict in the country so that then resources can be redirected towards public health efforts that are being done, whether it's maternal child health, whether it's addressing cholera outbreaks or everything else that we need to address. I think that really is complicating all of these issues. Environment and health by itself is a complicated issue. When you mix in a conflict, then that becomes even that much more complicated issue. And so once we address these underlying issues, I think we should be able to address some of these issues. As my colleague Jacob said, I think we have the capacity in some sense for us to be able to address them. We have the expertise. It may not be enough, but we at least have people who have ideas on how to address some of these problems. And so one of the things we identified earlier on as a result of displacement from the flooding, for example, these mental health issues that have become rampant on top of the mental health issues that have come as a result of this prolonged conflict that we've been living through can be addressed through interventions. And so, for example, some of the research I've done aims at addressing mental health issues by training people who, it's hard enough to train in psychiatrists, but can you train lay people to deliver simple interventions to address psychosocial issues among these populations? So that's one way to address some of these immediate issues that come as a result of these displacements from climate change or even from conflict by extension. Yes.
Okay. So I want to ask you, Dr. Niall, given what Jacob has said about funding, and funding is a main problem. So how do you think this happening in terms of lack of funding, and there's a lot involved in terms of training people, and both of you have said, and Niall has highlighted some of the things South Sudanese are doing. The people themselves have the capacity, the people have the desire to help their own people, but then we have the problem of funding. How do you see this playing out in terms of lack of funding?
So, and that's a very important point. As Jacob mentioned earlier on, most of our health right now care is provided by these international NGOs, and that just simply is unacceptable. A country worth its salt should not outsource its responsibility. If we think of health as a human right issue, then that shouldn't be left to the international organizations for us to deliver. So this basically needs a mindset shift from the leadership of the country. Yes, right now, I think we all know, we are all aware of the economic situation that is happening. That is also complicated by conflict, as I mentioned. But whatever little resources there are there, you can take a little bit to address some of these public health issues that are affecting us. So funding, whether it is local NGOs, whether it's funding local governments that are dealing with some of these issues, I think is the best way to do. How we convince the leadership that this is the best way to do, as we all know, there are public servants that haven't been paid for over a year and all of these things. And so those, I think it becomes really, really complicated when we talk about how do you get the resources from whoever holds them, whether it's the Ministry of Finance to the individuals that can then go deliver these services or these interventions. I think Jacob's organization is a prime example. $300,000 in the grand scheme of things is very little money for a government, right? Jacob shouldn't be running around the United States looking for that funding. That funding could potentially come from even one ministry in South Sudan to be able to address some of this. So if you have these NGOs that are don't get me wrong, I've worked with NGOs that have squandered resources that were brought to them, and that is a challenge by itself. But if you have people who have a proven track record of delivering services, maybe investing in some of those well-meaning agencies to do some of this work as we plan for the long term, because ultimately this work can't be done by individuals or on an ad hoc basis. We should have a strategy on how we are going to address these things. And so until we get to that point, it's going to be really challenging for us to address some of these really, really critical public health issues.
Okay. So thank you. I want to go back to Nial Tit Mahmed. I know you don't represent the government, so you'll not be able to answer the question that was asked by Jacob. But I want you to address what both Niall and Jacob have said about outsourcing our local issues in terms of building capacity within the country and the role of the government. You have access to people in government, you talk to them. So how do you respond to what Niall and Jacob has said?
Thank you very much. I think the issue of funding, which Jacob has brought up and Niall has also discussed it also, is very critical. Actually, without funding, nothing can be done. In fact, there are three things that you need to address the issues of environment and the issues of public health. Number one is the human resource, and human resource is also connected with financial resources. So financial resources is number two. And number three is the political will. So all these things are very critical, and they are basically dependent on the political will, which is the commitment of the highest office in the land to ensure that things are done as prescribed by the policy. Like Jacob said earlier, we have some of the best policies, but the problem is lack of implementation, and lack of implementation stems from lack of funding. But let me say this also. Some of the funding for environmental issues are supposed to be coming from the Western world based on the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement prescribes that all the countries that are developed are obligated to provide funding for climate change, mitigation and adaptation by those countries that are still developing and who are the victims. So this is an obligation from those countries. But at the same time, it does not spare us from committing ourselves and being the example to solving the issues by allocating considerable amount of money from our own budget. So while we demand, like others are demanding from the global West, for the funding related to climate change, like such as the Green Climate Fund, which is a mechanism set up through the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and Global Environment Facility, and the loss and damage funding. These are mechanisms that are already provided to fund environmental or climate-related matters. So these fundings are supposed to be there, and I want people to be aware, but the obstacle is that some of this funding can come, but the NGOs, international NGOs will always say there is no capacity in the country. So much of the funding, like the funding from the Green Climate Fund that was announced a week ago by the Minister of Environment and Forestry, Honorable Mabir. That's funding, much of it can even go back to the NGOs, the Western NGOs. And the reason it will go back to the Western NGOs is simple. They will say there is no capacity. So NGOs like Dr. Tim's NGO could benefit from such funding if they are able to come to the areas that are affected by climate change related diseases like cholera outbreak that has been affecting the country in much of the areas that are affected by flood. And such funding can be channeled there as part of the loss and damage fund. There are some NGOs that are already receiving some more grants in this funding. So I'm saying that we have the right to receive funding from the Western countries because what we are experiencing is not our making. But at the same time, the government should allocate considerable amount of money from our national budget. The second to that are environmental issues. And one of the areas to create funding is through the enactment of the environmental bill, which has been sitting between the Parliament and the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Environment for the last decade. So this bill, the Ministry of the National Environmental Protection Bill, will create mechanism for funding environmental matters. So like the environmental approval fees and monitoring fees. For example, environmental and social impact assessment fees will be paid to the ministry. The ministry will in turn use this money to address environmental issues. Strategic environmental assessment fees will also be paid. Fees for other matters, such as taxes for importation of environmental damaging goods. All of these can be created by those opportunities. These are some of the things that I see as opportunities for creating funding to address environmental matters. And also the same thing with health, because let us face it, anything to do with services, whether it is health, education, all these things have been sourced out to outsiders. So, and I think the funding cut that has been imposed by the UN especially, I think it will be a blessing in disguise. We'll have to look for other means of funding our own services, like education services is key, health services, environmental protection services, and all the core issues, livelihood, like agriculture and all these things. We'll have to look for internally for the funding. So yes, but I can say I have looked at the budget for the last several years actually, and the Ministry of Environment receives the lowest budget of all. And then the other service ministries like education, health, they receive the lowest budget. And so even though the Ministry of Education actually is much better in terms of funding compared to other ministries, but of course they have been up and down. But we need to put more effort toward that, and we have to actually raise more awareness and push for funding coming from the government. Even the Parliament should allocate money for NGOs that are actually doing things directly, allocating money for NGOs like the NGO for Jacob and others who are doing a lot of good things and who are not being funded now because of the funding cut. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
No, I was just going to add like what Dr. Niall was saying about lack of health workforce, especially in health. We really are severe short of trained health professional. For example, there are limited numbers of doctors, nurses, midwives, specialties. And then the challenges include inadequate training institution. And so I'm just agreeing with what he's saying. It's really also a big challenge.
Okay. Dr. Niall, do you want to?
Yes, I echo. Yeah, I just want to echo those sentiments. I think I was at a conference in Uganda a couple of years ago, and I was talking with the head of Department of Psychiatry, and I mentioned to her that there were more psychiatrists in the room where we were than there are in the entire country of South Sudan that has been at war for the last 70 years. And so really that crystallizes the kind of issues that we are dealing with. I think there are now up to about 4 psychiatrists in the country. Of course, psychiatrists take a long time to train, and so aiming for people who can deliver, lay individuals who can deliver these services without necessarily going through medical school and all the years of training. And this idea of task shifting has been implemented particularly in the mental health space to deliver services that can address some of these issues at the population level. Really is one way to address and alleviate some of these issues. related to capacity building.
And Dr. Quir, I was going to add something to bring this around that we talk about conflict, displacement, and all this. And I think maybe we should suggest something called health for peace, because regardless of your political, like whether you are the government, opposition, it doesn't matter. Everybody gets sick. And everybody wants to be healthy. And I think if we can just take that and say, what is our plan for our national health, environment, the health of the animal, it will bring peace, because at the end of the day, everybody gets sick. And at the end of the day, we are second to God. Maybe if God is ahead, we love everyone. We would love to treat everyone. We don't like anyone to die from communicable diseases. If you see the life expectancy in America and in the developed world, it's approaching 100. Life expectancy was around, 58?
58, 59, yeah. Mm-hmm.
59 for the women, and probably 58 for. Wouldn't it be great if we can just go 85 and 89? But this is for everyone. When we talk about public health issues, public health doesn't know your tribe. Public health doesn't know which party you belong to. All we know is we want you to be healthy and healthy people. So I think that could be an avenue of we can partner everyone in South Sudan to say, what can we do to make sure our people are healthy? And it's a small population we're talking about less than 15 million at last time I checked. I mean, we can solve these issues. If you go to Nigeria, over 150 million, that would be difficult people to manage compared to that. So I think it's manageable as long as things are in a row. So I suggest we tell the people of South Sudan, we can do health for peace to make sure we are healthy.
Yeah, go ahead.
And just to put a bow on that, we in public health actually often think of violence and conflict as a public health issues. And once you identify something as such, we often have the public health approach or different approaches to addressing some of these issues. You identify what the problem is, you come up with interventions to try to address those. And so really, we can't talk about public health. We can't talk about public health without talking about the ongoing conflict and violence and vice versa. And so all of those things are interlinked in some way.
Okay. So thank you very much. This is really why I started this. People who are experts who know how to inform us. So I want to thank you, Niall, for all the things you've laid out. Some of these things most of us don't know, and some of the things being done in South Sudan we don't know, and all the health implications the two of you have laid out. We don't really think about these issues. So thank you, and I think we'll continue this conversation. This is not the end. We'll continue to call. I'll call on you to ask what is happening and what you're hearing and inform our people, because for me, this is a form of civic education. So I want to thank you. Now I want to give you the last word, briefly, what you want to tell the people of South Sudan and what they can do as individuals, because we cannot always rely on NGOs or the government. What can you do as a community? Because we have communities abroad, and most of us have community money. So what can you tell the people of South Sudan and also the government as a final word? So Nialtit, if you want to begin.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think what we need to do as my final words is that we need to take the issues of environment and health seriously. Of course, basically when the environment is healthy, we are all healthy. Issues of environment are issues of public health, are issues of life. And we should not put them at the fringe. We should put them at the center of the policy making. We should prioritize them in budgetary process, allocating sufficient money, putting the best minds to address those issues all the time and every time. So we need political will from the president, from the people who are making the decisions, that environment goal is not opposite to the economic goal. So they are all the same. So when you have a healthy environment, you have a healthy economy, because it is from the environment base where you get all the resources to grow the economy. So we cannot have a stable economy if we don't have a stable environment. We cannot have a stable economy if we don't have a healthy population. All these things are intertwined. So this is my final message. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Niall. That's very brilliant. Jacob?
Yes, thank you. In this conclusion is that we South Sudanese during the liberation, most people might relate to Jesh Ahmed. What John Garang used to say, and Salva Kiir and the elders was like, hey, one day you will be a leader and in different capacity. We are leaders in health professionals, in the environmentalists. Credit to people like Niall Tate. That's why they go back instead of staying in diaspora to be with you, to do the best. This is the type of leader that we were told early in the 90s and 80s. If you go across the board, we have diaspora who are doctors, physicians, and they're helping different developing nations, whether it's in the US, Canada, or Australia. So my suggestion would be to the Minister of Health, which I know the new Minister of Health is one of my colleagues, and any environmentalists, take advantage of the technology, like what you are doing here, Queerware. We may not have money to provide, but we could also provide a technical assistance to just helping the South Sudanese healthcare system. For example, we have, during COVID, if you remember, Dr. Niall Tulam, we did education awareness in different languages. Also, if you're in diaspora, you need to support healthcare system in South Sudan, because if we build better hospital, better healthcare system, guess what? You don't have to transport your relatives to Uganda, to Kenya, to India. It's actually going to be cheaper for you. So I think we need to give ourselves opportunity. It has nothing to do with politics. In health, there's no politics, because it's a matter of death and life. Okay, so we really need to figure out and address this one area that benefit everybody across the board, to make sure we have human resources. Now, South Sudan is not just a new country anymore. You have countries that have developed different healthcare system, how they finances. We can learn from that. You have your own sons and daughters across the world that could help you with lack of resources of health professionals. So I think let's reach out with a pure heart. And also, some of us who want to come and help, we are coming with a humble spirit, not to say, hey, I'm helping you so that I will be Zol Kabir. I'm helping you so that I was threatening you to be a national minister of health. No, we are purely helping our people through healthcare crisis. It's a double whammy: conflict, displacement, and these things. And you add health issues on top of it, and you add South Sudan has not developed a good healthcare system since 2011. So I think we're just here to really help as a technocrat. And I hope our leaders cannot see us as a threat to them. No, we just want to help in our capacity of what we have learned. So thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Dr. Niall, have a final word.
Thank you very much, Dr. Queer, for this opportunity today. Closing, I just want to circle back to some of the issues that we have already discussed. So we're talking about environmental public health and some of these environmental factors that impact human health. And we have identified some of them are physical, biological, and some of them are chemical in nature, with oil pollutions in particular. And so as we think about some of those buckets, there are things that you asked earlier on, what can individuals do before we wait for the government or any outside entity to come and help us? Some of these issues are actually that are affecting the environment are things that we do as a society. For example, we all know that in South Sudan, access to sanitation, latrines, and all that is very limited. What are some of the things we can do to increase that? You as an individual, you can do things to maybe reduce the habits of polluting the environment or impacting the environment through the practices that we do, open air defecations and things like that, for example. And then some of the things that we think about, cholera for outbreaks, for example. What are the things that you can do as an individual to mitigate against some of those things? Practicing proper hygiene, even in the midst of the crisis that you're having, hand washing and things like that. That individuals can take to their own hands, and taking information and learning information so that you can help you and your family, your immediate family, to stay healthier. I think those are things we can do as individuals, as family members, as communities, before we get to the wider society, to keep ourselves healthier. At the end of the day, yes, there is a responsibility for government, there is responsibility for the rest of us to ensure that we're all healthy. but there are also things we can do as individuals to stay healthy within our environment, keeping our environment clean, practicing proper hygiene to be able to protect against some of these diseases that can really kill us, that shouldn't be killing people anymore. Thank you.
So these are some of the conversations we don't have that we need to have. Sometimes there are many people doing a lot of good. As Jacob has said, Niall was here and he's back home and he's doing amazing things, but we don't get to highlight these things. So
Yeah.
this will it gives people who don't pay attention to these things a chance to see, okay, Niall is there, but he's doing a lot of good, but we don't know. Some of us who do research and we read, yes, we know what he's doing. He's doing publications, he's doing some work. I know what Niall is doing, I know what Jacob is doing, but the majority do not pay attention to these things. So I think this is a chance for people to be able to see. And if they want to contribute in their ways, they will contribute. So I want to thank you for being here.
And really, we don't give you enough credit for highlighting really providing an important platform for people like us, other experts to come and discuss some of these issues. So thank you to you.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
really an important, and I know you probably don't like this part, but really thank you for providing this platform. I follow all of the interviews with all the other guests that we have had, different experts, and we all learn from and benefit from these conversations. So thank you.